And with that, we are ready for our fifth session, which is using Alma APIs, SRU lookups, and ILLiad server add-ons to enhance Alma ILLiad integration, presented today by Timothy Jackson, Bill Jones, and Angela Persico. Timothy Jackson is the Resource Sharing and Fulfillment Program Manager for SUNY Library Services. He's been in this position since 2019. Prior to that, he worked in the University at Albany's Access Services Department for nearly 20 years. Bill Jones is the Electronic Resources and Systems Librarian at SUNY Geneseo Milne Library. He's been a noteworthy leader in the library technology space for over 10 years, where he's written interoperability software for library systems, search tools and metadata schema for open educational resources, and published numerous articles and open source projects. Angela Persico is the Resource Sharing and Reserves Coordinator at the University at Albany. She's worked in interlibrary loan for the past 10 years and has been in her current position since 2020. All right, thank you for being here, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and as soon as you are ready, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Jill. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Timothy Jackson. I'm here with Bill Jones and Angela Persico, and we're here to talk about some ILLiad server add-ons that we've built. So if you could head to the next slide, Bill. I'm going to start us out by just giving the backstory of, how we wound up working on all of this. Next slide, Bill. So SUNY has traditionally used OCLC to meet its resource sharing needs. The products I'm specifically referring to are ILLiad and WorldShare ILL. There has been some SUNY resource sharing activity outside of these two systems, but the vast majority of our resource sharing activity historically has happened within ILLiad and WorldShare. But that began to change in 2019 when we implemented Alma at all 60 SUNY campuses. Alma does have internal resource sharing capabilities, so we implemented physical resource sharing for all SUNY libraries at Go Live, and then we began implementing digital resource sharing for interested libraries in 2020. And the reasons we did this were twofold. It had long been a standing goal of the SUNY system to have a union catalog with resource sharing capabilities, and Alma finally helped us get there. Also, we were starting to have some pretty serious concerns about our OCLC resource sharing platform costs. Next slide, Bill. So I just want to talk briefly about how things have been going with Alma so far, and generally speaking, things have been going well. What we're finding is that Alma resource sharing requires less staff labor and provides faster turnaround times than ILLiad and WorldShare. We're often able to provide longer loan periods within Alma because we were able to come to a system-wide 16-week loan period agreement for all SUNY libraries. Also, Alma allows users to manage all of their resource sharing requests and their loans and other requests within the same system, which has helped improve the user experience by cutting down on the confusion that was created by having those things spread out across multiple systems. And then lastly, Alma has helped us reduce our OCLC resource sharing costs across the entire SUNY system by approximately $150,000 per year to date. And we do expect that number to grow significantly in the future. Next slide, Bill. So as I said, things have been mostly good, but it hasn't been all good. Fill rates for articles have been fine, but fill rates for books have been lower than we hoped they would be. They've been down around 70%. Also, we found that Alma article resource sharing is not really appropriate for our larger libraries, mainly because the copyright compliance functionality in Alma just isn't sufficient for a library that often exceeds the Contu guidelines. So the end result of this is that most SUNY libraries are still using ILLiad, which means they still have their ILLiad request forms up, and some users are still submitting requests directly to ILLiad, which has been problematic for a few reasons. Next slide, Bill. First of all, a lot of the requests that are being submitted straight to ILLiad are for items that are locally available. And had the user gone through Primo, those requests would have been created as hold requests. But instead, because they went into ILLiad, library staff have to, first of all, identify that these items are locally held. Then they have to manually create hold requests in Alma, which is time consuming for library staff. And it also increases the request turnaround time for users. So after several years of this happening, Angela from Albany reached out to me and asked, is there any way we can automate all of this? And spoiler warning, the answer is yes. Next slide, please, Bill. As I said previously, Alma is faster than ILLiad and WorldShare, and it's also less expensive. So users going straight to ILLiad, by doing that, they were going to a slower system that costs libraries more money. So after we started working on turning Alma or ILLiad requests into Alma hold requests, I also started wondering, is there a way we could do that and take an ILLiad request and turn it into an Alma borrowing resource sharing request? And then when we started working on this and talking to other libraries about this, a third question arose from libraries that are, for their ILLiad lending, are checking items out to pseudo patrons in Alma. They asked, is there any way to take an Alma or an ILLiad lending request and convert it into an Alma hold request for that pseudo patron? Next slide, Bill. So about a little more than a year ago, I started working with Bill and Angela on creating ILLiad server add-ons that can address these issues. And we did this in the hopes that these add-ons would reduce workload for library staff, provide faster service for our users, and ultimately help us reduce our resource sharing expenses. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Bill.
Thanks, Tim. Can you see me okay and hear me okay?
Yes, Bill.
Great. All right. Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about the unintended journey that we took with this add-on, as it all started out as a hold requester add-on. So once upon a time in New York State, this is a beautiful SUNY Geneseo campus, and you can see the context that we're in, which is a Zoom meeting. And Tim asked, hey, Bill, do you think we could send a hold request to Alma from ILLiad? And I said, yes, I will build the thing. If you're looking for a great listening experience, go ahead and tune into 89.3 WGSU Geneseo's Voice of the Valley. And then later that semester, Angela asked, hey, Bill, I have a better idea. Do you think you could make it so we could send a borrowing request to Alma from ILLiad too? And I said, absolutely, made with love. So while we're talking about this add-on, I want you to keep in mind that you have options with this add-on. You can submit only hold requests, you can submit only borrowing requests, or you could submit both hold and borrowing requests. The development timeline, as Tim had mentioned, we started on November 3rd, 2023. You can see a screenshot of that first Google Calendar invite. We meet about every Friday or every other Friday, and we try not to interfere with each other's lunches. The system requirements for this add-on, you need to have access to your ILLiad Customization Manager. You need to have an Alma Users API with read and write access. You need to have the Alma Bibs API with read access, and you need to have the Alma SRU lookup enabled. So there are three different types of ILLiad add-ons. Today we'll be talking about a server add-on, and the add-on's installed into the Customization Manager and saved in a database. It's uploaded as a zip folder, and it runs every X minutes, and that X value is configured as the System Manager add-on interval. So what does this particular server add-on look like that we're talking about today? It contains one Lua file, one XML file, and then 4 text documents. And to give you an idea of what these files look like, here's that Lua code file with the green and black text behind here. You can see this colorful file here. That's your configuration.xml file storing your configuration values. And then we have these 4 different text documents for additional configuration. So how do you install this server add-on? And what you do is you open up the Customization Manager, click that New button there, select the zip folder for the add-on, and then just click Yes to enable it. You can set your configuration values down here as well. Well, how else could you configure them? You can configure it right in the customization manager, but you could also configure that configuration in that config.xml file and hard code those values. We kept building this out further and further, and currently there are 25 configurable fields for this add-on. So now we're going to talk about how this add-on works in a generalized way. From a configurable ILLiad queue, the add-on checks local availability of the request via a SRU lookup using the ISBN or OCLC number for borrowing loan transactions. Now, if it finds that the item's owned and available, it'll check the user's current holds and loans to avoid a duplicate request. If it's for a physical item, the add-on is going to attempt to send a hold request to Alma via the API, and if it's a success, it will route it to a success queue. And if it fails, it'll route it to a failure queue. If it's for an electronic item, like an ebook, it'll attempt to add the URL to the ILLiad transaction in a configurable field and then shoot an email off to the user with a URL to the item they're requesting. If that's a success, it'll route that to a configurable success queue. And if it's a failure, it'll route that to a failure queue. Now, if the item's not owned and not available, the add-on will attempt to submit a borrowing request to Alma. And if that's success, it will route that to the configurable success queue. And if it's a failure, it will route that to the failure queue. So now we're going to talk about the steps that this add-on goes as it runs. So first, it's going to check and see if it ran on the transaction already. As soon as the add-on runs on the transaction, it's going to leave a note that says the Alma borrowing request sender add-on ran on this transaction. We wanted to make sure that the add-on wasn't looping on transactions or that the transaction was just sitting in that queue and it was going stale. So we wanted to make sure that we kicked these out if they ended up sitting in that queue. Next, we're going to see if there's an ISBN or OCLC number in the ILLiad request and if the ISBN is valid. So sometimes users or systems leave erroneous information in the ISBN field. If there's an invalid ISBN sent to the SRU call, an error will be sent back. If an ISBN is present in the request, the add-on will mathematically validate that ISBN. If the ISBN does not validate, the add-on will attempt to extract an ISBN from the request and validate that extracted ISBN. Now, if there's no ISBN and no OCLC number available in the request, the add-on is going to route that transaction to a missing identification numbers queue. Next, we're going to check your availability. If there is an ISBN or OCLC number, and it'll use that SRU lookup with a preference over ISBN. So this is what it would look like if you were trying to connect out to your SRU lookup. That stands for search and retrieval via URL. So there are 3 configurable values when you're assembling this URL. You're going to have your full Alma URL, you're going to have your Alma institution code, and then you're going to have that identifier number. So this one's for the ISBN, and then you can see this one here is for the OCLC number. There's a slight change in the query there. And this is what it would look like if there was a success. So it'll tell you the number of records, and then it'll give you some bibliographic information. So here we can see the number of records. In this case, there were 0 records, and that's really helpful to know that you didn't own that item. But if you do own the item, you're going to have a special XML block, and it's going to contain the MMS ID for the item, the shelving location, the availability, and some other useful information. So we can determine whether the item's physical or electronic, depending on the type of tag that it has for that block of XML. If it's an AVA tag, we know that that's a physical item, whereas if it's an AVE tag, it's for an electronic item. Now, we thought it would be really great if we could add the target URL directly to the ILLiad transaction and send that to the user. We found that using the portfolio lookup actually was not very successful in doing this because there's a lot of inconsistencies in the ways that database aggregators catalog their information. So thanks to Heidi Webb at Upstate Medical University, she made the recommendation of using the permalink prefix and attaching the MMS ID to the end of that. And that's been a great success. It helps us bypass any authentication issues that might be with Easy Proxy, or it also allows for the user to select an item if there's multiple holdings. We also wanted staff to be able to determine whether or not they wanted to deliver electronic over print or print over electronic. So there's a prefer electronic over print for hold request configuration that you can set. Now we got to filter through these results that come through in this SRU lookup to determine if they're available or unavailable. It can straight up say unavailable, and we'll know that it's unavailable, but we can also have some shelving locations be excluded from availability, and those are stored in an excluded locations TXT document. If the record contains an AVA tag and it says the item's available and the item's in a permitted location, according to the excluded locations list, the record will be determined usable and the MMS ID will be used to send the hold request. Now, what's cool about the excluded locations.txt file is if the item location is on that list, a note will be left with the name of the excluded location, and the transaction will be routed to a review queue for items that belong in an excluded location. This excluded locations file works for both physical and electronic items that come back in the SRU lookup. And you can see here's an example note right here in the ILLiad transaction. We also built a process type router that would look at different process types in case the item was unavailable, but it was being repaired or it was missing, and you could go ahead and look into those different cases. So in this process type router text document, you can write the status out and then after the comma, put the name of the ILLiad queue you'd like to route that transaction to. We also hard-coded the process type of ILL into the add-on, and so that it would leave a note in the transaction, letting us know that the item was out on ILL, and it would attempt to send a borrowing request. We also wanted to be able to catch duplicate requests. So if the item is available in a permitted location, the add-on will check to see if the user has active holds or loans on that particular MMS ID. So you can use these two different calls here. The one is retrieve user requests, that's for holds. And you can also use retrieve user loans to get their loan request, changing these configurable values here. We also built some special functionality into the add-on, and the add-on will check if the title of the ILLiad request matches any active Alma hold or loan titles. And to do this, the add-on will remove any punctuation and convert all titles to lowercase and then compare the strings and see if they're equal. So at this point, there are only two options. We don't have the item and we need to send a borrow request, or the item is available on the shelf and we can submit a hold request for that user. So now we're going to talk about how do you place hold requests using the Alma Users API. You're going to use the Alma Users API create user request call. Excellent documentation on the Xlibris website. And to do that, you're going to connect to this URL here, and it's going to have some configurable values. You're going to have your full Alma URL. You're going to have the user's username. You'll have the MMS ID for the item, and then your user's API key. So you'll connect to that URL, and then you'll send this small XML package with the configurable values of pickup location type, pickup location library, and pickup location institution. So if it has a user request tag on the return, we know that that was a successful hold request. That's all we really need to know. If it's a failure, it's going to contain an error code and an error message, and those are usually pretty useful for determining what the problem is. There's a whole bunch of different errors that could happen. This list is provided by Xlibris on their website. We also added a special feature to this hold request function where you could use the PIDs, or always known as the item IDs, and you could send hold requests on those particular item IDs. So you can set a configurable ILLiad field and list a bunch of different PIDs separated by a space, and the add-on will iterate over each of those PIDs and place individual hold requests on those items. So what happens if the hold request fails? There's two possible routes. If you have submit borrowing requests enabled, it will try to submit a borrowing request. Otherwise, if you don't have that option enabled, it will route those transactions to a configurable hold failure queue. Now we're going to talk briefly about placing borrowing requests using the Alma Users API. So with the Alma Users API, to create a loan request, we're going to use the create user request for resource sharing call. The documentation at Xlibris is excellent for this. It's going to look a little similar to the hold request, except it's going to use a slightly different URL to connect to, and then it's going to have a different XML body with specific metadata about the item. We found that this was the most bare bones XML message that you could send along to that URL to place a borrowing request. We assemble our XML right in the Lua code, picking up different bibliographic information from the ILLiad request, along with the pickup location type, library, and any notes that are left in the ILLiad transaction. We send those along to Alma as well. So if we send that call out for that resource sharing request and the return has this tag user resource sharing request, we know that that was a success. Otherwise, it will be a failure. And these are some of the reasons that it could fail. We've found that there are other reasons that are not listed here on this page provided by Xlibris. Now, as Tim had mentioned, in 2024, in July 2024, we presented about our borrowing add-on at the IDS Project Conference. And during the Q&A portion of the presentation, many people from the audience were interested in transforming the borrowing add-on and making it work for lending requests. This is because libraries have been manually checking items out to pseudo patrons, and they wanted to automate putting items on hold for the pseudo patron. So in August, we started developing the lending add-on that's now being tested at the U Albany. The add-on will allow staff to check out lending requests to one pseudo patron account, or staff can configure the add-on to use different accounts in Alma for each borrowing institution. We've got some great documentation about the add-on. You can find it here at this URL. And some future plans. We're going to continue testing the add-on at the University of Albany, University at Buffalo, Upstate Medical University, Stony Brook University, and Syracuse University. We're also hoping to begin testing the add-on at additional libraries. So if you're interested, please reach out. Just some tools that were used in the development. Postman was used to do the API testing. Notepad++ was the main text editor. And I used Beartail to tail the logs from the ILLiad server. Now we're going to talk about the impact at the University of Albany. Here's Angela.
Thank you, Bill. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the impact it's had on us. You can go to the next slide. So we're currently using two instances of the borrowing add-on, one where only holds is enabled and borrowing is disabled, and one where borrowing is enabled and holds are disabled. So when a loan request comes into ILLiad, if it has an ISBN or OCLC number, it's sent to awaiting request processing. The hold version of the add-on monitors this queue and it checks for local availability and if the patron already has an active request. If the item is owned and available in our catalog, a hold request is placed. If the patron already has an active request for it, it's routed for review. And if the item is unavailable or not owned, it's sent out to ARM or OCLC direct request. We have a custom holdings group in WorldShare with all of our Alma partners. And ARM automation checks if there's a match to any of those partners. And if there is, it routes the request to awaiting ARM review. And if there's no match, it just goes out to OCLC. So if it goes to awaiting ARM review, a custom routing rule then routes the request to a queue monitored by the borrowing version only of the add-on, and then sends that request out to Alma resource sharing. And if the request can't be filled in Alma, a new request gets created in ILLiad and sent out to ARM, and we have an IDS logic rule that bypasses that Alma partner automation and just sends it straight out to OCLC. Next slide. So between March 1st of 2024 and January 29th, we received about 1,700 loan requests in ILLiad, and these weren't imported from Alma. And of these, 542 were sent to Alma via the add-on. 114 of those were available in our catalog and were processed by the hold version of the add-on. And the remaining 428 were sent out to Alma resource sharing with the borrowing add-on. Of those, 80% were filled by an Alma partner, and the remaining 20% got sent back to ILLiad. The add-on was also able to identify 79 requests so far where we owned them as an ebook, and 252 requests, and that's mostly just this fall and this spring, where 252 requests were available on course reserves. And then of the 1,669 requests, just under 30% had to be filled by lenders in OCLC or Rapid. And just as a side note, if we don't do rapid lending in Alma, if we did, I imagine that number would be even lower. Next slide. Oh no, sorry. So all that being said, this has greatly reduced the amount of time spent processing requests. The hold creation process and the ebook notification process is fully automatic as long as the patron provides a valid ISBN or OCLC number. So those get handled really quickly. It's done a really good job of catching duplicate requests from our patrons and, like I said, the reserve books. And as Tim already mentioned, we find that borrowing workflow in Alma is a lot faster than ILLiad. It's also a lot easier. We can have more staff and students processing the requests with a lot fewer errors and needs for assistance. And we have that consistent 16-week loan period agreement with all of our Alma partners. Okay, next slide. So now these are just some of the challenges that we've had with the add-on. It unfortunately can't reactivate the original ILLiad request if the request can't be filled in Alma. So there ends up being a second request created on the patron's ILLiad account. We, as I mentioned, use 2 versions of the add-on because of the way our workflows are. It was too difficult to just use the 1 version. So we have 2 instances running. Unfortunately, it can't create borrowing requests. This is an ex libris thing. Patrons that have a personal delivery pickup location, it just won't work. It does work for hold requests. So we have a support or a enhancement request in for this. I'm not sure why they decided to not allow a personal delivery on borrowing, but they don't. And we use both home and office delivery for our patrons. And then requesting items from multi-volume sets has been a challenge because there's no easy way to pass that information to Alma for borrowing requests. But as Bill mentioned, we did figure out a way to get requests created by the PID. So that's been working really well for creating our hold requests. If a patron wants a volume 2 and we own it, we throw the PID in there and it places a request on the correct volume. So that's really nice. And finally, we just need to remember to update our custom holdings groups whenever we add new Alma partners. And so that's a good opportunity for staff error when I forget to add new partners in there and then we aren't sending things to them. Okay, next slide. And as Tim and Bill both mentioned, after we presented on this last year, we had a handful of libraries asking about a lending version. And I stopped to think about how that might benefit us too. We don't really use pseudo patrons here, but I found a way that we could. So Bill developed a lending version of the add-on that we're now using, and we actually have 2 instances of that running as well. We have 2 branch libraries, and many of the staff and students there aren't trained in how to use ILLiad, but they are trained in Alma. So IDS Logic now routes requests for our branch libraries to special queues for both document delivery and lending. And this is both articles and book chapters and loans. The 2 instances of the lending add-on monitor the queues, and create hold requests for pseudo patrons in Alma, and they have a pickup location of personal delivery. The requests then get routed to holding queue in ILLiad. Staff or students at our branch libraries are trained on how to print resource request slips in Alma. They pull the items, they check them in, and the items go in transit to the ILL office. And as you can see in my little picture there, we have an example of what this transfer slip looks like. It has a note with special processing ILLiad request and a personal delivery office. So staff and students at the branch libraries know that those need to come to the ILL room. And once it arrives in the ILL office, ILL staff scan the items in at the personal delivery desk, which then checks them out to the pseudo patron. And then they print the ILLiad slips and process them in ILLiad as usual. When the item is marked found in ILLiad, we have the Alma NSIP lending add-on, putting the item in a temp resource sharing status in Alma, and it still keeps the item checked out to the pseudo patron. So it's been working pretty well. And now I will turn it back over.
Great, thank you, Angela. Next slide, Bill. So the add-ons that we've created are available in a GitHub repository. The URLs are here. We plan to add these add-ons to the ILLiad add-on directory once they've been more thoroughly tested. But if you're at a SUNY library and you're interested in taking advantage of this, feel free to submit a ticket to SUNY Library Services at info@sunyolus.libanswers.com, and I'll be happy to help you. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. So I want to open things up for questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim, Bill, and Angela. We're going to go into the Q&A now. If anyone does have any questions for our presenters, please throw them into the Q&A. I see one already. And the first question is, do you need IDS Logic to use these server add-ons?
Jill, I can take that. You do not. Um, Angela is using logic to help automate some of the things that happen after the add-on runs. But you could use these add-ons and then do all of that work manually. So no, logic is not a prerequisite of using these add-ons.
All right. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? If so, just use that Q&A button and ask there. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes. Okay, we have another question. For statistics, is there a way to distinguish that the hold or resource sharing request was successful?
I think I can answer that. So the request does leave a note, and it also routes to a queue that you designate. So for example, if the hold request is successful, we have it go to a queue called hold RS success, I think. And then if it runs on the resource sharing version, it adds a note that it goes to a queue for resource sharing. I don't know if that's specific to us having two versions of the add-on, so Bill can probably answer that. But I think it does leave a note whether it's placed a hold request versus a borrowing request. And we actually use IDS logic to add a lender to those requests. So if it goes to the hold success queue, logic puts Alma hold in the lending string, and if it's filled by the borrowing add-on, it just puts Alma, so it lets us really easily see which version filled the request.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how many SUNY libraries are using the add-on?
Right now it is 4.
Great. Another question. I think I missed how the query of local holdings works for the lending requests. ISBN?
Yeah, I believe it's ISBN or OCLC number, same as the borrowing version. And I will say if it's so we use it for both loans and scans so that the article request can come to our main library. If it's say a journal volume that needs to be requested or a specific volume from a set, we use the PID. And I think the add-on even catches if it's a multi-volume title, it goes to a special queue, and we know to put in the PID for that and then resend it to the add-on.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked if you could put the GitHub link somewhere copyable. I would just like to share with everyone that we are going to be posting the links to all of today's presentations with all of this information on our website, and we will be sharing that out post-conference. But if someone also has them available and wants to post them in the chat now among the presenters, that would be great as well. It looks like someone just did. So thank you for that. But again, all of the slides with all of this information will be shared later on. And one more question. Do you need to have interlibrary loans set up as a resource sharing library in Alma for the add-on to work if we just use pseudo patrons?
If you're just using the add-on, like on the lending side of things, to create hold requests for pseudo patrons, then you shouldn't need to configure a resource sharing library in Alma.
Okay, thank you. That's all the time we have for questions. I see that we didn't answer all of them, but we are going to be forwarding all of these questions to our presenters and then sharing those answers out post-conference. So thank you very much for that to our presenters. I am now
Thank you, everybody.
going to move us on to our next presentation. And that is using the WorldCat API to integrate holdings information and ILS data, presented by Francesco and Sid Deveren. Francesco is an IT systems administrator at Western Washington University's Western Libraries. In addition to his sysadmin duties, He works with library colleagues to automate workflows and integrate systems and processes. He's been working in library automation for over 30 years and has enjoyed every minute of it. Sid Deveren is a collection management and assessment librarian at Western Washington University's Western Libraries. In her role, she collaborates with colleagues across library departments to implement assessment projects and streamline data management processes. All right, Ron and Sid, whenever